If it is true that Rock Hudson has AIDS, that nothing but good can come out of breaking that silence.
What if the most desirable man in America had to hide who he really was? What if Hollywood's golden boy, the tall, square-jawed heartthrob who kissed Doris Day on screen, spent his nights in secrecy, navigating a world that wouldn't let him live openly? And what if the silence, forced on him by a homophobic industry, led to one of the most heartbreaking and history-shifting moments in the AIDS crisis? This is the story of Rock Hudson, the man whose secret romance, staged marriage, and tragic final months would explode into headlines, shatter public perceptions, and change the way the world viewed HIV and AIDS forever.
Hudson died in his sleep at 9 this morning.
We're going to talk about the hidden boyfriends, the secret recordings, the anonymous letters that he sent to lovers warning them that they might have been exposed, the betrayal that sparked a $21 million lawsuit,
Rock Hudson had sex with him and never told him,
and the Hollywood machine that built him up, used him, and then all but abandoned him when he needed them the most. Before Rock Hudson, he was just Roy Harold Shurer Jr., a lanky, quiet boy born in 1925 in Winnetka, Illinois, a picture-perfect suburb just north of Chicago, with white picket fences and freshly mowed lawns, and a deep undercurrent of don't ask, don't tell. His father walked out during the Great Depression, and his stepfather, Wallace Fitzgerald, reportedly ruled the house with a very heavy hand. Roy was shy and awkward and soft-spoken, a boy who towered over his classmates but shrank in every other way. His mother, desperate to toughen him up, reportedly pushed him to, quote, act more like a man. Neighbors recalled seeing bruises on him, and from an early age, Roy was taught that softness and sensitivity was something to be punished out of a boy. Some classmates would later recall that Roy never dated girls and that he seemed more interested in the boys on the football team than the cheerleaders. But this was the 1930s, and being different wasn't just taboo, it was dangerous. So Roy, like so many others during that time, had to learn how to suppress that side of him. He graduated high school in 1943, right in the middle of World War II, and like so many young men at that time, enlisted in the US Navy. He was just 18 when he shipped out, eventually serving as an aircraft mechanic in the Philippines. For Roy, the Navy might have offered him the first taste in that hidden world that he's been suppressing for so many years. You know, his first step towards something resembling freedom. He was still deeply closeted, of course, but somewhere in the chaos of war, he may have started to feel less alone. Like there were others out there. Like maybe one day he could stop pretending. One former sailor, quoted anonymously in a 1980s biography, recalled seeing Roy sneak off during shore leave with another enlisted man, disappearing for hours into the palm forest outside of base. Another account, resurfaced on a Reddit thread called Ask Old People, described a, quote, movie star handsome sailor who flirted shamelessly in mess halls but never got in trouble, likely because the officers had their own secrets too. These stories aren't confirmed, but they paint a picture of a young man, you know, learning to navigate the thrill and the risk of desire in this hyper-masculine world. You know, the war, of course, was so brutal, but for some, it also offered anonymity, distance from family, freedom from the small-town gossip where so many of them grew up, and really the ability to test boundaries and to try things for themselves. That said, not all of his experiences were positive. In fact, years later, Rock's roommate Bob Preble would say that Rock had, quote, a couple of experiences in the Navy, but didn't find them, quote, all that enjoyable. After the war, Roy picked up and moved to Los Angeles. He was working as a truck driver when he started sending headshots to talent scouts. One of those agents was Henry Wilson, a notorious fixer and kingmaker who had a stable of handsome male clients and a rumored preference for seducing them. His roster included some of the biggest heartthrobs of the era: Tab Hunter, Rory Calhoun, Guy Madison, and it seemed that Henry had a type. Tall, clean-cut, masculine, and according to rumor, often available for more than just screen tests. Henry gave Roy a makeover, starting with the name, Rock Hudson. It was strong and American, masculine, a cover story in a name. Henry got Rock his first small roles, but apparently Rock couldn't act just yet. He famously needed 38 takes to deliver a single line in his debut film, Fighter Squadron.
This 1949 screen test did just what it was designed to do. It revealed a potential star.
Ellie.
Hello, Vic.
I knew you'd come back. Honey, it's wonderful to have you back. Come on. We're gonna celebrate with champagne.
But he was gorgeous, and in the 1950s, that seemed to be enough. At the time, studios seemed to be more concerned with just selling fantasy rather than finding the best actor for the role. And Rock was a fantasy and a dream in human form. Tall, chiseled, and deeply photogenic. Look magazine once summed up his image like this, quote, "He's wholesome. He doesn't perspire. He has no pimples. He smells of milk. His whole appeal is cleanliness and respectability. This boy is pure." Warner Brothers saw potential, but it was the Universal International that truly invested. They put him on a crash course in star making, acting lessons, voice coaching, fencing, horseback riding. They even taught him how to walk, quote, more masculine. Everything about him, his voice, his movements, his smile, were sculpted for the screen. Behind the scenes, Henry continued to pull the strings. He protected Rock's image, helped cover up rumors, and made sure that press clippings framed him as the all-American bachelor. The goal wasn't to make him a great actor overnight, it was to make him believable. And slowly it started to work. His big break came in 1954's Magnificent Obsession, which truly turned him into a bona fide star. That was followed by All That Heaven Allows, and later the massive hit Giant in 1956, alongside Elizabeth Taylor and James Dean. And both he and Dean received Oscar nominations. Rock played Texas oil man Jordan Bick Benedict Jr. The film was an instant classic, and Rock became the biggest movie star in the world on the back of it. I actually think Rock was a better actor than many give him credit for. This is a random side note, but there's a scene in his movie Seconds at the very end. I couldn't find a clip, but if I find one before I finish editing this, I will put it in here. But he's crying, and I remember watching that movie and thinking he was really, really good. And to read that he was kind of known as being someone who was really pretty but couldn't act kind of shocked me, to be honest. You know, to the public, Rock was the ultimate bachelor. Tall and polished, always seen with a woman on his arm. But in private, he was living a double life. And in some ways, a very bold one at that. As his fame rose, so did suspicions. Universal became increasingly anxious. Rock had been seen publicly with a handsome Italian actor many times. To try to tamper that down, the studio issued a press release claiming Rock was dating Jill Clifford, a British heiress. Around the same time, Life magazine named him Hollywood's most handsome bachelor, and the first paragraph read, quote, "Fans are urging 29-year-old Hudson to get married, or explain why not." That pressure wasn't just press, it was contractual. Universal added morality clause forbidding Rock from engaging in, quote, immoral behavior, which included even being seen twice with the same man or not appearing in public with a female date. To protect him, they assigned him beards, women who would pose as romantic partners. Some were actresses, others were studio secretaries or publicists. The most infamous of these arrangements was his 1955 marriage to Phyllis Gates, Henry's secretary. At the time, gossip columns ate it up. Fan magazines published photo spreads of the two smiling in front of their new mansion in Beverly Hills. But insiders knew that something was off. There were no public displays of affection. The couple rarely appeared in public after the wedding, and when they did, it was very stiff and formal. And behind closed doors, they reportedly lived in separate rooms. Rumors swirled that Rock spent more time with his male friends than with Phyllis, and that she grew increasingly frustrated with his emotional distance. Eventually, things deteriorated so badly that Phyllis reportedly hired a private investigator. She lured Rock into a conversation under the pretense of patching things up while secretly recording him. On tape, she asked how long after the wedding he had his first gay affair. Rock, without hesitation, answered, quote, "Oh, I don't know. The next day." 3 years later, it quietly ended in divorce. Thankfully, there was no drama or scandal, and years later, Phyllis would write a book claiming that she was genuinely in love with Rock and had no idea that he was gay. But according to biographer Darwin Porter, Phyllis absolutely knew and was part of the cover-up. One Reddit thread even speculates that she was promised a payout from Universal in exchange for playing her part in the charade. While Rock kept his private life pretty quiet, some of his female co-stars apparently suspected something. One of the most famous incidents came decades later when Doris Day was asked if she ever suspected that Rock was gay.
Many people would ask me, is Rock Hudson really gay? And I said, it's something that I will not discuss. First of all, I know nothing about his private life. And if I did, I wouldn't discuss it.
That was a rare show of kindness in an industry that was often brutal to closeted stars. And some other stories weren't so gentle. Shelley Winters, who worked with Rock early in his career, once said that, quote, He's got more chemistry with the camera than with women. Gene Simmons, his co-star in A Failure to Arms, was said to have clashed with him behind the scenes, reportedly complaining that his aloofness made it hard to generate authentic romantic chemistry on screen. Even Susan St. James, who starred opposite him in Macmillan and Wife, later admitted that their relationship on set was, quote, awkward, and that she didn't always feel connected emotionally during the scenes. And then came the jokes. By 1965, it seemed that Hollywood insiders were fully in on the joke of Rock's sexuality. That year, Rock starred in A Very Special Favor, a romantic comedy in which his character pretends to be gay in order to woo a woman.
There are some men who just, they're very devoted to their mothers. You know, the type that likes to collect cooking recipes or exchange bits of gossip.
It was marketed as lighthearted, but the subtext was biting. Biographer Mark Griffin wrote, quote, "The conflicts that he grappled with daily and the deadening silence he had to endure to maintain his position were being played for laughs." He also had a complicated relationship with James Dean. On the set of Giant, the two reportedly clashed. James thought Rock was stiff and, quote, a Hollywood phony, and Rock thought that James was, quote, arrogant and weird. Some sources, including a few spicy Reddit threads, have speculated that the tension may have been sexual, that one made a pass at the other and was rejected. Of course, that's never been confirmed, but it adds another layer to the mythos. Behind closed doors, Rock was hosting elaborate pool parties at his Beverly Hills home, boys-only affairs that, according to multiple Reddit threads and Hollywood memoirs, often turned into clothing-optional hangouts. These weren't just casual get-togethers. According to a Redditor, Rock was part of a secret circle of A-listers, agents, and closeted creatives who rotated between Palm Springs, Hollywood, and Fire Island. One Redditor even claimed that their uncle, a studio set designer, remembered Rock as, quote, friendly, generous, and incredibly flirty with the crew, but only if you knew what team he was playing for. He reportedly had romantic ties, or at least meaningful flings, with several men over the years. One of the most enduring figures in his life is actor George Nader, a longtime friend who many believe was actually Rock's true partner. Around this time, Rock met George's longtime partner Mark Miller, and the three of them formed what Mark would later call a chosen family. They were known as, quote, the trio. According to Mark, they never had sex. It was pure friendship, but they shared everything else and stood by each other for decades. Rock would later leave his entire estate to George and Mark. Before all of that, though, back in the early 1960s, there was Lee Garlington, a young film extra who met Rock at Universal Studios. The two quickly fell into a quiet, secretive relationship. They'd take road trips down the coast, sleep in separate beds when friends came to visit, and they would avoid photographs like their lives depended on it. Because in many ways, they did. Lee would sneak out of Rox's house before sunrise to avoid being seen. They vacationed together in Puerto Vallarta on a tip from Elizabeth Taylor and lived for a short time like any other couple. But decades later, in a biography, Rock called Lee his true love. When Lee read that, he said he wept. Quote, "I had no idea I meant that much to him." In the final chapter of his life, he was involved with Mark Christian, a much younger man who we will be talking about later on. There was also whispered rumors about Rock's fascination with emergency star Randolph Mantooth, whom some insiders alleged that Rock was, quote, obsessed with him during his later years. Though that particular connection has remained highly speculative, and there is no confirmation of that at all. One Reddit thread suggests that Rock frequently picked up men from LA's cruising scene, particularly Griffith Park and the bars along Santa Monica Boulevard. Another user posted that their grandfather worked as a bartender at the famous Gold Coast bar and said that Rock would occasionally slip into the back, order a quiet scotch, and leave with company by midnight. Rock's management team, especially his agent Henry, worked overtime to keep these rumors buried. One Reddit user on a thread called Classic Hollywood claimed that Henry was known for threatening journalists and gossip columnists with lawsuits or blacklisting if they even hinted at Rock's sexuality. There were even whispered payoffs, envelopes of cash traded for silence. And when things got too risky, Henry wasn't above throwing one of his other clients under the bus to protect Rock. The most infamous example, Tab Hunter. In 1955, when Confidential magazine was preparing to out a major Hollywood star for being arrested at a gay beach party, Henry allegedly handed over a story about Tab instead, sacrificing him to take the heat off of Rock. The tabloid ran a brutal expose, which nearly derailed Tab's career overnight. Years later, Tab would say that he suspected his own agent had betrayed him, and most insiders agree.
I was living a lie, absolutely. I was another person. I mean, my sexuality was my sexuality, and it was not what people, perceived You know, people believe what they want to believe.
Rumors also swirled that Henry once hired someone with mob connections to quietly handle potential leaks about Rock's sexuality. According to a 2003 Vanity Fair investigation into Confidential magazine, Henry and Rock's legal team were so desperate to keep Rock's name out of the press, they reportedly contacted underworld fixers to threaten gossip columnists. No stories about Rock ever made it to print, but the whispers of envelopes of cash, of blackmail, of midnight calls to kill the stories never stopped. By the 1980s, something was shifting. Rock wasn't just aging, he was fading. The once commanding stage presence, the deep velvet voice, and the effortless charm, it was starting to dim.
He looked tired, and when he wasn't shooting, he would spend his time sleeping in his trailer.
He was losing weight and brushing it off as a new diet. Then came the persistent, dry cough. Makeup artists on set began whispering about how much concealer they had to use to cover the dark circles under his eyes. Directors noticed that he was starting to ask for shorter shoot days, and he just seemed tired and disoriented at all times. Fans sent letters saying that he looked, quote, different on TV. Older, gaunter, almost unrecognizable in some roles. Still eager to work, Rock signed on to film The Ambassador, a political thriller set in Tel Aviv. Friends begged him not to go. His health was failing, but he was determined. When he returned home, Mark Christian was stunned. Rock had lost 10 pounds. His face was, in Mark's words, quote, dull, ashen gray. It was the first visible sign that something was very wrong. In January 1984, Rock visited a Beverly Hills dermatologist about a small lesion on his neck. The diagnosis was devastating. Kaposi sarcoma, a signature mark of AIDS. According to Mark Miller, Rock cried for a week. He confided in only a few trusted people: George Nader, Elizabeth Taylor, and eventually Mark Miller himself. On June 5th, 1984, Rock told Mark and a few others that he had AIDS, and maybe cancer too. He asked Mark to accompany him to an appointment with UCLA AIDS specialist Dr. Michael Gottlieb, and at the meeting, the doctor confirmed Rock's fear. He had AIDS. The doctor later said that he asked gently if Rock had a lover. Rock reportedly paused, and then changed the subject. But when the doctor asked whether the press should be told, Rock nodded and said, quote, yes, if you think it will do some good. Still, Rock didn't want Mark Christian to know. He was scared and angry, maybe even in denial. According to some friends, Rock worried that telling Mark would spark headlines, lawsuits, or worse. He feared Mark would go public, or worse, sue him. And Rock, who built his entire career on secrecy and control, wasn't ready to surrender that. At one point, he told a close friend he wanted Mark out of the house immediately. But after some convincing, he backed down. Whether it was guilt, confusion, or fear, we don't know and we never will, but what we do know is this: Mark Christian didn't find out about Rock's diagnosis until nearly a year later, from the news. Instead, Rock took a heartbreaking step. He decided to send anonymous letters to 4 of his former lovers, informing them that they may have been exposed. He didn't sign them, and George Nader mailed them from Palm Springs to avoid any suspicion. For the next several months, Rock chose to live in denial. He refused to tell Mark Christian, and he refused to go public. Desperate for hope, Rock flew to Paris in secret, seeking an experimental treatment called HPA-23. French doctors told him that the virus was no longer detectable in his blood, and for a moment, Rock believed that he was cured. But the drug wasn't a miracle, and within weeks, his condition spiraled again, and the truth set in. There was no cure. Not yet. In 1985, he returned to TV, shooting scenes for Dynasty. The moment he appeared on camera, fans gasped. He looked emaciated, gaunt, his voice was so weak. The press began asking questions, and still, silence. That July, after collapsing again in Paris, his publicist finally confirmed the truth. Rock Hudson had AIDS.
Mr. Rock Hudson has acquired immune deficiency syndrome.
That statement, however, wasn't without confusion of its own. Cullert said Hudson's condition was improving daily and that he had been cured of AIDS. Later, however, she retracted that statement, saying it was her misinterpretation. She said Hudson does still have the disease.
The fallout was instant. Headlines around the world exploded. Some were sympathetic, but others were very cruel. One tabloid ran the headline, "Kiss of Death," referring to a kiss that Hudson shared with co-star Linda Evans on Dynasty. Rock's name was now forever linked to the most feared disease in the world. He had reached out privately to Nancy Reagan, asking for help accessing more of the HPA-23, but the Reagans declined. They later claimed that they never saw the letter, but insiders say otherwise. Rock had campaigned for Reagan, dined at the White House. Now, with his life on the line, they turned away. But in the middle of the media frenzy, one woman refused to back away. Elizabeth Taylor. She wasn't just Rock Hudson's co-star. She was his confidant, his fierce protector, and eventually one of the loudest voices in the fight against AIDS. While others distanced themselves, Elizabeth leaned in. She visited him in the hospital, defended his dignity, and used his star power to break the silence. In 1985, not long after Hudson's death, she co-founded AMFAR, the American Foundation for AIDS Research, and raised millions for treatment, awareness, and compassion at a time when AIDS patients were being shunned. Her activism wasn't performative, it was personal, and it helped transform the way that the world saw the disease and the people living with it.
I promise you, I have committed my life, with my life, to fight for AIDS, the cure for AIDS.
Mark Christian, Rock's partner at the time, would later say that the betrayal nearly destroyed him. According to the court documents and his own testimony, Rock never told him. They had continued to live together, sleep together, and be physically intimate for months after Rock's diagnosis in 1984. And when the news finally broke in July of 1985, Mark found out the same way the rest of the world did, through the headlines.
This is the way I feel about it. Whether or not I come down with AIDS, if I come down with it, it's even more tragic. But I think a person has a duty to disclose to the people they are with that they have a disease like that.
Mark immediately got tested and by some miracle, never contracted HIV, but the psychological toll on him was apparently intense. In 1986, Mark filed a lawsuit against Rock's estate, one of the first major legal actions of its kind. He accused Rock of intentional infliction of emotional distress, fraudulent concealment, and negligence. The trial was nothing short of explosive.
People have a duty to disclose if they have AIDS to their lives. That's what it shows.
Of their last years together are being spilled out in a sensational courtroom battle.
The case has finally landed in court after several years of legal wrangling. Christian claims he first learned that Hudson had AIDS only after it was made public. Christian says he was shocked to find out the man he shared a bed with for 2 years had been privately diagnosed with the disease a year earlier.
Let the record show the jury is properly seated in the jury box and counsel and the parties are present.
For the first time, the intimate details of a gay celebrity relationship were dissected in court. Hotel receipts, love letters, private phone logs, all were introduced as evidence. Reporters packed the courtroom, and Rock, though already gone, was suddenly on trial in the court of public opinion.
In a highly publicized court case involving AIDS, a Los Angeles jury ruled today that the late actor Rock Hudson was guilty of outrageous conduct in failing to tell his lover that he had AIDS. And it was a precedent-setting action, obviously. The jury awarded Mark Christian $14.5 million. Much more than the $11 million he was asking in his lawsuit against Hudson's estate. The suit claims Hudson and Miller conspired to keep the actor's disease a secret so that Hudson could continue to have sex with Mark Christian. The jury ruled that Christian suffered emotional distress because he wasn't told about the actor's condition.
Christian is here. He just won a lawsuit totaling $21.7 million against Rock Hudson's estate because Rock Hudson had sex with him and never told him he had AIDS. Now, you probably already read about this. Mr. Christian does not have AIDS. And a jury gave him more money than he ever thought about asking for. Why'd you do this? And you certainly were vindicated in the court.
Well, that was the main thing, was that I did feel that I had an absolute right to be told that Rock had AIDS. He had an absolute duty not to sleep with me for another 8 months, knowing full well he was exposing me to the disease. And it was simply a matter of standing up.
It was a tragic chapter, but also a very historic one. As Rock's condition worsened, he reportedly stopped speaking. His eyes were sunken and he had lesions on his body, and he was rarely lucid. Nurses were instructed not to discuss his condition in front of him. There was fear that even hearing the word AIDS might cause him more distress. Whether he accepted what was happening or not is still unknown. By September 1985, Rock was too sick to walk. He was flown back to Los Angeles on a private jet and taken to a secluded estate in Beverly Hills, away from the paparazzi and from the questions and from the world that once adorned him. There, behind the tall gates and drawn curtains, Rock spent his final days. George Nader was there almost daily, and Elizabeth Taylor visited, bringing flowers, holding his hand, and making sure that he knew that he was loved. They were the ones that stood by him in these quiet moments, when all the glamour had faded and all that remained was the truth of what was happening. But not everybody showed up. Some of Hollywood's biggest names, people who had once toasted him at parties, posed beside him on red carpets, called him, quote, brother, never came at all. Frank Sinatra, once considered a close friend, reportedly turned down Elizabeth Taylor when she begged him to help raise money for AIDS research. Studio heads who had made millions off of her and Rock simply hung up the phone. Even Linda Evans, his Dynasty co-star, recalled how people began avoiding her after his diagnosis because they had kissed on screen. They wouldn't even hug her now. And as the days grew shorter, Rock faced the truth of what fame had really given him. Applause, yes, of course, but also abandonment. On October 2nd, 1985, at the age of 59, Rock Hudson died.
Hudson died in his sleep at 9 this morning at his $3 million home in Beverly Hills. The actor had returned to his home in late August after having been told by doctors his health was too poor for any experimental therapy for AIDS. Nothing could be done. He came home to die.
There was no televised funeral, no red carpet memorial, no public apology from the Reagans, just a press release and then silence. But silence didn't last long. Within weeks of his death, the cultural reckoning began. Congress allocated $221 million to AIDS research. Donations to AIDS charities skyrocketed. Suddenly, the disease wasn't just a fringe issue. It had a name and a face and a body count that no one could ignore.
People, I think, are jolted and are surprised in a profound way when anyone who is famous, anyone who one would not associate with this disease, becomes diagnosed with AIDS. We saw that certainly in the case of Rock Hudson, which was a major turning point in this disease. For people who otherwise have had no personal contact with people with AIDS, now there's somebody that they know who has this disease, and it personalizes the epidemic in an important way.
Before his death, Rock quietly donated $250,000 to Elizabeth Taylor's AmFAR Foundation, making him one of the first celebrities to financially support AIDS research in such a visible way. It wasn't publicized at the time, but insiders later confirmed that the gift helped fund early clinical trials and awareness campaigns. To this day, Reddit threads still dissect his life. Some believe that he had more lovers than we'll ever know, and others claim that there was some sort of, quote, lost interview, hidden away in a vault where Rock allegedly spoke candidly about being gay, but no tape has ever surfaced. Rock Hudson didn't get to live openly, but in dying publicly, he really did change history because he gave a face to AIDS when no one else could. He forced a nation to confront its prejudice, and he helped to kickstart the modern HIV/AIDS awareness movement. Rock Hudson spent his entire life performing on screen, in interviews, and in his own skin. He played the perfect man, the perfect husband, the perfect Hollywood star. But his final role was something else entirely. He became a symbol, not just of loss, but of truth. Of how many people were forced to suffer in silence until someone brave enough broke that. In an interview years later, Joan Rivers remarked that Rock's death was, quote, a horrendous way to bring AIDS to attention. But she acknowledged that it worked. Rest in peace, Rock. You changed more than you will ever know. Thank you so much for watching today's video, and I hope that you found it interesting. I'm sure a lot of you know even more than I know about Rock's life, but I loved learning about his life, and I just thought it would make for a great video. So let me know in the comments below if you liked it, and if you'd like me to deep dive into someone else's life like I just did with Rock's. And I hope you're having a great day. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon with another video. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.